You're listening to Art Affairs, episode 31. Today I'll be talking to Travis Louie. Alright, so my name's Michael Faith, and this is Art Affairs. Art Affairs is my attempt at shining a spotlight on the many wonderful people that make up this amazing art community, featuring conversations with artists, gallerists, curators, telling their stories. You can dig through previous episodes, complete with show notes, at artaffairs.podcast.com, but the best way to stay plugged in is to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. You can also connect with the show on Instagram and Facebook at Art Affairs Podcast. On Twitter, it's art_affairs. All right, so today's guest is artist Travis Louie. Travis's work is so interesting and is this fascinating combination of 19th century Victorian portraiture and old circus sideshows, human oddities, and vaudeville acts. But that's just on the surface. Behind every character is this rich and fantastic story. We talk about how important to him the storytelling aspect of his craft is, as well as how he moved from commercial illustration into a career in fine art, his experience teaching art at SVA in New York, and a whole lot more. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Travis Louie. Travis, welcome to the show, man. I'm excited to have you on.
Cool. I'm excited to be here.
All right, so let's dive into your background for a bit. From what I read, you were born in Queens, New York. What was it like growing up in New York City? Do you like living in the big city at all?
Well, I wouldn't call it the big city. I mean, it's one of the 5 boroughs, and Queens is it's not like Manhattan. It's different, a lot more room. I lived about a mile from Shea Stadium, and the site of the 1964 World's Fair, which I wasn't old enough to go to that, but it was fun going to what we used to call the ruins of the fair, which was they left a lot of stuff up. So it was kind of fun as a kid going over there and hanging out with my friends. That's
really cool. So what did they leave up? I mean, did they not tear it all down? They just kind of left stuff there?
Well, I mean, the Unisphere is still up. I mean, you can see it in movies all the time. Like in Men in Black, it's one of the things that the spaceship crashes into at the end of the movie. And also there was an old restaurant that looked like spaceships. There's 2 of them, right? If you drive past Flushing Meadow Park, you could still see them. And there was a parachute drop, and then there was a series of fountains. So all that stuff is still there, just not the different pavilions that were sponsored by whichever company sponsored the fair.
Yeah, right on. That's cool. So, what was the, you said it was sort of disconnected from, Manhattan. It's still close enough to where I live in Austin, Texas, so that's big enough city for me. But what was your particular area of Queens like? What was the neighborhood like where you grew up?
Well, it's funny. If you went back there right now, it looks like Chinatown. But when I was there, it was pretty much an Italian, Jewish, German sort of neighborhood, and it had all these great stores. It was quite a small community in a way, and it had its own art store and had this wonderful movie theater at the end of Main Street. It was on the corner of Main Street and actually right at the end of the block. It was called the RKO Keith's.
Okay.
It was this gigantic movie theater built in the 1920s, so it had these remarkable sort of staircases when you walked in, because back then people would go out and they would like to make an entrance. So when people would walk in, the way it was set up, you couldn't help but notice anyone who came into the place. So they used to have stage shows there too. Originally it was kind of a theater for stage shows, and then as they started releasing all these motion pictures, it became a movie theater.
Oh wow!
And all sorts of people played at that stage. People from vaudeville, so people from that performed at the Catskills would perform at this theater. So you could go there, you could see the Three Stooges performing there.
That's so cool.
That was part of their tour back in the 30s, right? And then years later, in the 60s, toward the end of the 60s, Cream performed there.
Oh, wow.
So that must have been something. Again, I wasn't around for that, so I didn't, just hearing the idea that you could have gone to see Cream performing on that stage, I don't really know a lot about Cream and how what kind of tours they had. I know they weren't around very long. I mean, we know who they are because it was an important moment in music history. And I guess the most famous person there was probably Eric Clapton, right? That's one everybody talks about.
Well, it's so cool that it was sort of at this transition period where it was going from live production to movie theaters, and they sort of just repurposed the same venue for that. That's interesting.
Well, this place was huge. I mean, it was as big as Radio City Music Hall. Oh, wow. So it had a balcony and everything. I saw Star Wars there in '77. And That was a big deal. On a screen that big, that was something. Man.
Yeah. Well, and I know that you were really into like old 1950s sci-fi horror movies as a kid. Like, how did that become such a love for you? Was it that theater and the experience of it that contributed to it?
Actually, it was a different time. Back in the '70s, videotape didn't exist. You couldn't, or rather, it wasn't in a format that anyone could just buy at a store or rent. So in the '70s, you just watched movies on television whenever they played them. So you'd have I guess even where you are, you're in Texas, right? So
right, yeah.
There must be local stations, right? You have the networks, which probably when you were a little kid, there were only 3 networks, right? It was just NBC, CBS, ABC, and then you had these local stations. You'd have a local station. In New York, there were several local stations. You had, and they were all out of New Jersey, it looked like. And they would have the licensing to play these old movies. So you could watch, the movie of the week on one of the stations was always something from MGM, like a big MGM movie, right? And then the other stations had whatever movies they can get a hold of. And there were a lot of science fiction films that they used to play on a rotation.
Nice. Well, and also, I mean, you are also into old pulps and comics, and it's almost like you were a fan of all these things that came the generation before yours. I guess, how did you fall in love with what effectively was the popular culture of the prior generation?
Well, it started out with comics. I used to go to the comic book stores. There were 2 of them. There was a really big one on Northern Boulevard called Mike's Comic Hut. It's like we would all make a pilgrimage to that place because it was the biggest comic book store in the area. And then there was a smaller one, which was closer to where I lived, and it was on Roosevelt Avenue. And that place was more than comics. It was also books. So it had all these rare books, and that's where I got to see a lot of these old pulp magazines that no longer existed. So books like Tales, I guess, Amazing Stories, books like that. So it was all these old science fiction writers. So I saw a lot of that kind of stuff. And then, of course, there's Famous Monsters of Filmland that Forey Ackerman had put together, the old Warren Publishing Company. So there was all that.
So was it these sort of like mid-century films and comics your main exposure to artistic expression, or did you also go to museums and see the fine art side of things?
Well, in the beginning, it was all the pulp stuff, obviously. My grandfather was a really huge Norman Rockwell fan. So through him, I was able to see all this great stuff. He really liked Norman Rockwell, and he really liked Prince Valiant,
okay,
which was drawn by a guy named Hal Foster. And I got to see all that stuff too. And he would always tell me these stories about what it was like to go get these things at the stores. And it's really interesting how one person can influence you so much just because you sort of look up to him. So my grandfather was really into all these things, and so I just I looked at whatever he liked, I kind of liked. So all these great, it was nice for him to point these things out to me. You don't really, these days I'm not so sure that's as everyone's moving around so much now, right? So
sure,
it's hard to connect with the kids,
Yeah, no doubt. What kind of work did your parents do? I mean, did you have any kind of artists in your family, or? Not
really. I mean, my dad wanted to do watercolors, but he never really pursued it. And then my grandfather, he could draw things, kind of technical things, but he was a machinist. So he was, he worked for a watch company after World War II. Before that, he was actually working on stuff for whichever machine shop he worked for. They were actually everybody was trying to do stuff for the war effort, I guess. That's what was going on. So we're talking like, in the 1940s. And then it was just sort of a natural progression to go into another machinist shop, and it happened to be for the Bulliver Watch Company. I don't know if you're familiar with Bulliver watches.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. That's awesome. And when did you actually start taking an interest in creating art? I mean, obviously you had a lot of these interests in pulps and comics and in your grandfather's interest in Norman Rockwell, but when did you actually pick up a pen or pencil and start creating it yourself?
1970s. I was a little kid. Norman Rockwell had just passed away. So it's like 1978.
Oh, wow.
I had just seen Star Wars in the summer before that. There was a lot. The 70s. There was a lot going on. It was just a lot of excitement, right? And then they were releasing these magazines all the time that had a lot of production art that they would put in the magazine, and no other. It wasn't like they had Entertainment Tonight on television or anything, so you really didn't know what was going on. And most kids didn't go to the newsstand and pick up Variety. That wasn't something that you would do, as a kid, unless you had like showbiz parents or something. So the magazines were Starlog, Fantastic Films, magazines like that, along with, Famous Monsters of Filmland. And I would see these illustrations. And I guess there was a big moment in one of the magazines. They had released these drawings from Ron Cobb, and he had been working on the movie Alien. But along with his drawings, there was H.R. Giger. He had his designs for the Alien that were in the magazine, and also a guy named Jean Girard, I guess Mobius. That's
nice.
what he's more known for.
Yeah,
and just beautiful stuff, And I kept up with it. I kept looking at what these guys were doing. I started to collect Frank Frazetta posters, because they was. I would just, I'd go to the record store, I'd stare at that Molly Hatchet cover that he did, I'm just staring at it, Or there's a cover for Meatloaf's Bat Outta Hell. It was painted by a guy named Richard Corbin, right? And I was looking at this cover. And this is things, you just notice them, and it's like part of all this sort of, it's part of the filter. You pick up all these things, these visual stimuli, and you just sort of absorb it, right?
And so that sort of motivated you to say, hey, I want to do this myself. And so at the beginning, were you more or less just mimicking a lot of the visual stimulus that you were seeing through these other artists that you were taking in?
Well, I mean, we just drawing pictures, pretty much. That's what we did. Me and my friends, you buying comic books and then you're drawing, what you can draw, right? And some of us had dreams of working for Marvel Comics or DC Comics, so they were those friends of mine. They ended up pursuing that. Nice. But that wasn't my gig. I didn't want to do comic book, stuff. That seems, well, first of all, it's just really hard. It's really hard to be a comic book artist because you're drawing the same character over and over again, and that's really hard to do. And then to be consistently, right? Because you have this house. You have to stay in style, or in form rather, right? So every time you draw, you can't just make it up. You can't just go to they hire you to draw Spider-Man. It's not like, well, I'm going to change Spider-Man. You're not allowed to change Spider-Man. You have to stick with whatever,
Sure. So was your family supportive of your interest in creating art? Like, did they encourage that in you?
Oh, yeah. Anything to keep me out of trouble, I guess, right? So, because it's so easy to get into trouble, in a neighborhood like that. I mean, that's just the way it is, right? It's good to know where your kids are, right? That was important. And they had a big scare around that time. A young man, a boy was abducted, and they never found him, and everybody knew about it, and so everyone was trying to keep their kids, safe. So that everybody just wanted to know where your kids were.
Did you know the family that happened to?
I did not, but it was all over the news. Very, very famous New York story. The child's name was Eitan Pates, was his name. And, because of that, everyone, all parents were just like terrified with their kids. And then, the local TV station, which was WNEW Channel 5, which now it's a Fox station, but they would always say at 10 o'clock, someone would say, "It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your children are?"
Is that where that came from? Okay.
That came from that, yeah.
Wow.
So right after that happened, they started doing that. And then they also started putting missing children pictures on milk cartons. I don't know if that's a thing out in Texas, but definitely in New York, that was a thing. And just on the back of a milk carton. What's a thing that everybody buys, right? Milk. So that's a great way to put it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess then your parents were ecstatic to keep you inside drawing all the time.
Yeah, well, so I'm drawing pictures, so they know where I am all the time. You're a 10-year-old kid. You shouldn't be in Manhattan as a 10-year-old kid.
Right.
You should be wandering around. That's not,
So you ultimately went to school at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. Why Pratt? Like, why did you end up deciding on that?
I had a scholarship.
Okay.
So, money was tight. So if they're going to offer some money to go there, then I'll go there. The other schools are just as expensive, and if you can get a break on the price, it had a reputable, it had a reputation for having some good teachers there. So,
Your focus was communication design, from what I understand, which I'm not exactly sure what that means. It sounds like illustration.
That's just the big heading for the whole department. So that if you're in the communication design department, that includes graphic design, illustration, art direction, basically commercial art.
Okay.
But I guess they didn't want to use the term commercial art because I guess that's like.
I mean, yeah, because the name itself suggests either graphic design or illustration, so I wasn't exactly sure which of those it was. So it's sort of this umbrella.
And it's all of the above, right? It's like it's all of the above.
So you ultimately got your BFA in 1990. Like, what was your goal at that point? What were you wanting to do with the degree in communication design?
Well, the idea was to be a freelance illustrator, So I thought, oh yeah, I'll do book covers, and that'll be the thing. And I kind of did when I graduated, but it's funny when you graduate, what you think you want to do and what you actually do are two totally different things, right? So here I am thinking I'm going to do these book covers, and instead I end up doing illustrations for the little pamphlets you get when you go to the bank.
Oh, okay.
You walk in and there's a pamphlet, there's an illustration showing somebody walking a tightrope or balancing, with scales balancing, or there's like a hedge maze, in there, and if you go to the end of the maze, that's where the money is. That kind of this kooky kind of art direction for any kind of bank. And that's the kind of stuff I was doing.
Was this all freelance, or did you end up on a staff job at some point?
Oh no, it was all freelance. That's just how it was, Different back then. I mean, back then there was no, computers didn't exist. So, well, at least not to the extent that, we have now. So you couldn't send somebody an email, right? So you had to fax your sketches to somebody. If they wanted a color study, I had to get in my car, I had to drive into Manhattan and physically show them the thing. Now, of course, I do work for people now where I've never actually met the art director or seen him, or even spoken to him on the phone. It's all entirely through email now. That's kind of crazy.
That's a totally different landscape for sure. Did you stick around New York City in that general vicinity after graduating?
I hung around for a little while, until about 1995. And then, I got married, and then I moved away. I moved out of the city, and I live up in the country now.
Upstate, yeah.
Yeah.
So while you were doing this commercial illustration work, doing book covers and or bank pamphlets, did you still have time to work on your own personal work at the same time while you were doing these illustration jobs?
Yeah. I tried to. I mean, I had my first. I guess I was in a group show in Manhattan in 1990, actually, or actually 91. So it was the first time I was doing that kind of work, and it was different. The art world back then, and even now, but definitely back then, it was definitely something about, if you can imagine, there's like this big sort of kingdom, right? And then you have high art and blue chip stuff is at the top, and then all the other little areas, these little sort of regional kind of galleries, right, are all over the country in little places, and it's anything from people that are doing Western art in Arizona to people that are doing, paintings of sailboats, over in Long Island, over, so it's just, it was just a different kind of market for everything, right? So it's still sort of like that today, but the bigger art world likes to pretend all these other things don't exist, which is very funny to me. I mean, you could go to today. You can go to Scottsdale, Arizona, and probably spend a whole lot of money on a cowboy painting, and it would be a painting of cowboys, but it'll be a really expensive cowboy painting. Whereas back in those days, that market didn't really even exist on that level, right?
So was it difficult to balance the commercial illustration work with your personal work? Like, how did you find the time to do both?
You find a way. If you really want to do something, you have to just find a way. So I'd be awake all the time. I hardly got any sleep. I'm just always, even now I don't hardly get any sleep, But now it's I have more of an establishment in galleries now, so I could maybe concentrate more on that now. I still do commercial work when it comes in, if I like it. But I could I could always turn things down. I don't have to do everything that comes my way. But when you first start out, you're kind of taking any job, right? That's like any kind of art, whether it's music or acting or whatever. You take whatever jobs, right? I mean, like David Letterman was a weather guy for like a minute, or wherever he started out, right? And
yeah.
I think of every actor you've ever seen doing commercials, right? Like didn't the guy that was he was in that show Roseanne with Roseanne Barr. John Goodman is his name, yeah. Wasn't he doing like Alka-Seltzer commercials in the beginning? It's whatever, whatever it takes, right? So whatever jobs, everything's a step toward what you want to do in the beginning.
What was so you said you were in some shows really early on, like in 91. What was your work like back then? Was it similar to what you're doing now, just maybe less polished, or was it completely different?
Well, I had different ideas of what I wanted to do, and I was still kind of figuring things out. Back then, I was doing these giant paintings of bald people, which I thought was very funny. I look at it now and I crack up. I'm like, well, why did I paint that? Because I was always into these sort of like almost like joke paintings. Like I would do a painting of Yul Brynner, and then there'd be a bald guy standing in front of the painting of Yul Brynner. And the title of the painting was Yul, I did it first, or something like that. And supposedly the bald guy that I painted was Telly Savalas. So it's like Telly Savalas looking at Yul Brynner, but it's like a picture of Yul Brynner. So it's very funny.
Well, it's funny that you had these rich stories even back then. I mean, like you still had like these interesting backgrounds to your pieces even at that point.
Well, I love stories, and just growing up, my dad was a bartender. So he was always around people telling stories, and a couple times I would visit, and I would hear these people's stories, and it just sort of caught on. So I've always been like this since then. I mean, he always had the most interesting people that would show up at the bar that he bartended at, including Joe Namath.
Oh wow!
Or Forrest Tucker, for whatever reason, he was just there. I don't know what was going on, what function was happening in town that he happened to be in town, and he just sort of stopped at the bar. Yeah, big guy too. Forrest Tucker's like this really tall guy. And trying to think who else. Bob Keeshan. I don't know if you know who that is. That's Captain Kangaroo.
No,
Captain Kangaroo shows up. Yeah, and him I got to meet. I actually got little 9-year-old Travis got to meet Captain Kangaroo.
Were you watching the show? Like, were you familiar with him?
Well, I mean, they put it on. I wasn't watching that stuff, but I was a weird kid. A lot of that stuff I would rather watch. These horror movies and these science fiction movies. And that's a whole other thing. My parents would put me in front of the television set because they both worked. So whatever was on the public broadcasting station was whatever I was watching. And it just happened to be the year that they were doing sort of a retrospective of great films in film history. So I got to see all these things I probably shouldn't have seen as a little kid. At this point, I'm like about 6 years old and I'm watching these things. And they were playing Nosferatu.
Oh wow!
Was on, and they also played. I guess it was Rashomon, which is a Kurosawa movie. But keep in mind, as a 6-year-old, it's kind of a frightening movie.
Sure,
right?
I couldn't imagine watching that so young.
I'm watching the scene, and I'm just terrified by the lady telling her version of what happened, and she's yelling. And it's all in Japanese. I'm a kid. I'm 6. I can't read the subtitles. I have no idea what the hell she's saying. But it just looks scary, right? And then the look on everyone's faces, right? I mean, the guy is just horrified. He's like, "Oh my God, she's telling everybody there what happened."
I love those movies, man. Kurosawa is so brilliant. So I guess you mentioned that you were taking every job you could in the commercial illustration, and ultimately started to transition away from that and towards your fine art. And I think in 2003, really kind of put away commercial illustration for a large degree entirely. What was that transition like? Was that something you sort of made a decision overnight and you're like, hey, I'm self-sufficient now. I don't need this as much anymore? Or was it a transition where you decreased one and increased the other over time?
It was exactly that transition. It was just a huge risk. right? Like, you just don't know. And sometimes you have to take that risk. And I thought, I guess I better try and jump in now before I get too old. It's, it's funny because when you're young, you think your idea of what old is changes as you get older, right? So, I mean, when you're 12, you think that 20 is old or something, right? Which is funny. And now, clearly, you're not 20 years old. So now you're just like, oh, wait a minute, it's not that old. I guess a lot depends on how you look at things, right? I mean, some people, they just live such a continuous life with sort of this abandon, right? And they never lose that sense of immortality that a 15-year-old has, that takes these risks, I'm imagining that Tony Hawk still thinks he's like 16 years old, and he just gets on that skateboard and he does all these things, but then, some people, they regular folks, they just like, oh, wow, my leg hurts. I mean, I can't do that anymore. Oh, they see it right in front of them, but every profession is different. If you're a person who works at like a blue collar kind of job, and but a one that's very strenuous on your body, like you're a bricklayer or something, you notice right away as you get to a certain age, like, wow, maybe I shouldn't be doing this anymore.
Right.
Whereas if you work for a huge financial institution, let's say, and you're working your way up, you're in middle management, you're not really, the only thing you're noticing is maybe the new employees are younger than you. But other than that, your job is not, you're not stressing your physical body so much, just your mental body, just your mind is what gets stressed out, for whatever. I mean, I don't know anything about that, but definitely it's not the same as a bricklayer. Your body is not being, used like that. The only thing, I guess, for us, for artists, is you start to notice maybe your eyes start to go when you get older, So maybe I got to work bigger because I can't do the small things anymore, so all the pain is starting to get bigger because the eyes. Who knows?
Or do hand stretches.
Yeah, well, that's one thing. You could always do that, right? You can stretch your body and, stay flexible. But your eyes, the eyes are different. You have to either adjust, wear glasses, or, work bigger. Right?
For sure. So you have a core set of galleries that you tend to work with, Haven, Rock LaRue. There's several that you, and KP projects most recently. How did you first start getting noticed by those galleries and building some of those relationships? Well,
I had a show. Okay, I was looking at the West Coast because I thought that maybe things weren't working out so well on the East Coast. I thought, well, what if I started sending my work out west, see what happens? And the first place that I actually showed my work was La Lou de Jesus Gallery over in Los Angeles. And I was in a big group show over there. And then somebody at the Copro Gallery, which back then it was called Copro Nason Gallery, he saw my work. His name is Gary Pressman. And he gave me a shot. He gave me a show, like a group show. But the first gallery to actually give me like a solo show on the West Coast wasn't even in Los Angeles. It was in Seattle, and it was Rock LaRue Gallery. And she believed in me, and I still work with her today. I try to give her a show every other year. I give her a show because, she was there at the beginning.
For sure, yeah, no, and they kind of got reactivated, kind of came back, which has been cool to see.
Yeah, well, the owner she wanted to travel. So she slowed the gallery down for a little bit, but then she was like, you know what, I really should be doing the gallery thing. Let me go back and do it again. And she went back and then reopened everything, and so here we are, right?
That's really cool. So let's dive into your work a bit. Obviously, throughout your career, you've deal with a couple of different predominant thematics, and one of the large kind of overarching ones is this circus sideshow vaudeville aesthetic coupled with sort of 19th century Victorian portraiture. So I guess, how did you come about this blending of those two, and what was your fascination, I guess, initially that really got you interested in human oddities and circus sideshows?
Well, it's a lot of things. It starts off with my fascination with Coney Island. And even as a little kid, I would go to Coney Island. And they still had a carnival there. Or rather, they had an amusement park there. But it wasn't quite what it was at the turn of the century. When it was a place called Dreamland. We're talking like 1908. Obviously, I couldn't have been there. But there were these marvelous sort of it's like a whole other world, a place like that, right? But there were two amusement parks there, big ones. There was Dreamland, and then across the way there was another one, which eventually became Steeplechase Park. I'm sure you could probably look it up, and I was fascinated by the idea of these performers that would come over here from all these different countries, because they would recruit people, right? So even a person like P.T. Barnum, he had that museum in New York in the 1860s, right? He would go and find people that aren't even from this country. Like people would come over here, and I like this idea of immigrants, that coming over here with whatever special skills they had, and then they would get into the business that way, whether they were contortionists or whatever, right? It was like a talent search, the way these guys put these things together, and then there's a certain amount of showmanship there as well, right? You want to, even somebody with just like sort of a mild sort of deformity, they'd really play it up, right? They would either use makeup or dress them up a certain way, like if you were a giant, they would give you bigger heels on your shoes to make you even taller,
right?
They'd give you a big hat,
Right.
So if you were 7 feet tall, suddenly you appear to be like 8 feet tall because you had all this extra
Right.
stuff.
Yeah, they really exaggerated a lot of the people's kind of natural,
Right.
aesthetics.
And of course, being of immigrant lineage, all of us are, I guess. But Chinese people that came here, they they came here for different reasons, right? They all did. But there was like a minute where a lot of people were coerced into coming over here with this idea of, I guess, gold fever. Someone had discovered gold in Northern California in the 1840s, like 1848 actually is the year, over at Sutter's Mill, right? And it started the gold rush. So you had these Chinese people that were told, hey, there's a mountain of gold in Northern California. We should come out here. And a lot of them ended up coming out here and ended up working on the railroad or something, that they became day laborers. They didn't do a whole lot of prospecting. But it's the thing that drew them here. And then, there weren't a whole lot of pictures taken of them. So I was fascinated by people's old photographs. And that's where I got interested in 19th century photography, because I thought, look at this. You could buy these old photographs anywhere, at a flea market or sometimes at a garage sale or estate sales. You'd find these antique shops, and I just started collecting all these old photographs. And then I started writing stories about the people that I saw in the photographs, because I kind of felt bad that you're basically buying somebody else's memories at that point, right? So,
right.
And then I started thinking about, wow, well, it would be kind of cool if I had this whole sort of world of characters and of all these unusual people that came over here who had very specific things about them, right? That made them different. Whether they were, at first it was just human oddities, and then it became like ogres and things like that, And that's where the work kind of came from, more or less.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And so I guess from what you're saying, it doesn't sound like your family actually had any photos of your own. So you were more or less...
there's nothing.
What was the reason? Was it because you were, I guess you're a third generation, your grandfather immigrated over, right? So is that why? Was it because, the family didn't have access to that type of photography?
Well, it was it was just a different time. They didn't really, it probably wasn't as accessible, I guess. I mean, my grandmother's grandfather came here. He was actually the first one to come here, and of our family, and he came here part of that first wave. But then he ended up going back because he got scared while he was over here. He made enough money to actually go back because a bunch of his friends died working on the railroad, and he's like,
oh wow,
he's like, screw this noise, I'm out of here. And he's like, I'm gonna go back. So he goes back to China. And my grandfather meets, I guess, his granddaughter, my grandma. And at that point, you're not allowed to bring your wife over here, I guess. It was the Chinese Exclusion Act was in full effect at that point. So just a lot of dudes are brought over here, not a whole lot of ladies,
I didn't realize that. So
oh yeah, that was a thing. She didn't actually come here until much later. So I'm gonna say probably the 1940s she came here, because they lifted the act after World War II. And my grandfather's brother, I guess he served in the European theater, right? Like he didn't fight the Japanese, he fought, I guess, the Germans, right? So he was over in Italy, World War II, and then they lifted the act, and and then she was able to come over here.
Okay, right on. So yeah, I'd read that racism and in particular the immigrant experience weaves in and out of a lot of the work that you've made throughout your career, which I didn't realize at the time because I read a lot of these bios and they're so lighthearted, they're so charming. It's not super obvious that that's really the overarching kind of social commentary that you're putting in there. Is that intentional on your part to sort of ease people into those conversations?
Well, it is because I wanted to make it more universal. I wanted to make this idea of fear of the other. How can you make it really universal? Then you can't just pick one particular race because then it's not terribly universal, is it? So, but what if it's these strangers? What if it's these monstrous sort of people that come here, like ogres and gnomes or whoever? I happen to do a painting of, and they come over here and they're trying to get a job. If you're, what kind of job can they have? Based on what they look like and what they do for what they can do with their hands. A lot of them in my stories that I write, a lot of them just have regular jobs when they come over here. But the idea is that if you use these bizarre sort of peculiar people, right, strange folk, to sort of take the place of a person from Poland or from Russia or from Africa or then you're not concentrating on one race. You just have all these so they're sort of making it more universal for everybody so they understand maybe it's not good to treat people differently because they're different than you. I think that's all fear. It's all fear based, right? And it goes back to that primal urge to be interested in looking after people that are just like you, right? So it's sort of like why baby zebras grow up and learn, hey, that's a lion. Stay away from the lion because they'll eat us, but only hang out with other zebras. That's okay. So on a primal level, that's what happens to humans. We still have some of that in us, and it's kind of ridiculous on the one hand, and then I get it, but we have to grow past that. I think
for sure.
Even now, our country right now, the way it is. It's irresponsible to generalize an entire group of people. It's not accurate. It's whenever I hear somebody on some fake news program or whatever you want to call these things, foaming at the mouth and pointing the finger and saying it's all those people, and I'm just like, well, you don't know all those people,
right? You're
just saying that you're generalizing, and that's really not. When you generalize people, you marginalize them, and that's terrible. But I mean, you could, if you really get to know people and just talk to people, you find out they're a lot more like you than you realize, right? Or at least that you would hope that we all want the same things. We all want to just live a good life, right? That's really at the core of it, right?
Exactly.
It's not, I mean, yes, I'm sure there's crazy people that want to do crazy things, but generally, no, you just want to live a good life. I think anybody wants to live a good life.
Right. Well, no, and I guess it's just disheartening when people have become so self-centered, I guess, where they're not caring about all the people around them. And they just like, well, as long as I'm good, then, screw everybody else. Like that's a big problem. And that's, I think, driving a lot of this is where people aren't empathetic anymore, in large numbers. Obviously, there's a lot of empathetic people, but a lot of the people that you're talking about, they're just lacking empathy. They just don't care about anybody else. Like, how do you solve that?
Well, it would help if their lives were better. I think if you live a life that is full of fear that you're always 2 months away from financial calamity, we shouldn't live like that. Nobody, that does things to people. It makes them point the finger. They want to have a scapegoat. They want somebody to blame it all on. Oh, it must be those people. That's why I live like this. That's terrible. That's a terrible way to see things, And so I don't blame them for feeling like that. If you could figure out a way that everyone has a decent life, then you would have less of these problems. I think that's what I think.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that's right. I guess let's go back to your work. So storytelling obviously is the root at a lot of what you do. And you talked a little bit about why that is as far as, your experience with your father being a bartender and all these interesting people coming in. I guess is building out these stories for your characters an essential, necessary part of your creative process?
It is, yeah. I think it's important. It gives them a sense of wholeness, right? I like the idea that I could know not only what they look like, but where they came from and why their life is like that. And then that's what the stories, just to give them a really good background that people can read about, or sometimes I don't even publish the whole story. Just a couple of paragraphs is all I need.
No, I love the depth and how rich they are. I guess in your process, does the story tend to come first, or does the image come first and then you build the story around it?
Well, generally the story comes first, and then every now and again I do have to write the story a little, or rather I have to pad it a little bit afterward with more information so it makes sense to me. But generally, no, I usually write the stories first.
Okay, very cool. Are the people, or I guess the characters that you create, are they often modeled after real people and events in your life? Like, are their stories effectively, in part, your story?
Sometimes they are. Sometimes they'll be. There's folks that live in my town that are really interesting sort of people. I see them. They're like the town characters. And I put their stories sometimes in the paintings. Depending on what kind of character that I'm making.
Well, and I have read that you're somewhat of a people watcher, which I can absolutely relate to. It's hard to do that and not be completely awkward. And that sometimes the people that you observe and interact with on your day-to-day will make it into your work. How do you retain those details about the people that you meet? Like, do you take notes and like draw on the subway, for instance, or is it more of a mental thing that you stash away?
I write notes afterward. I write down if it's something interesting. I go, oh yeah, that's an interesting story. That guy pulling the radio flyer wagon around all the time. Like, why does he do that? And then I think of a story to go with it. I go, well, maybe he does this. That's really not how it is. Obviously, I didn't talk to him. And I try not to get too close to people. I don't want to freak people out. There's nothing worse than you're in the middle of doing something and somebody walks up to you and says, hey man, what are you doing? That's just kind of a weird thing to do.
No, for sure. So I guess, how do you approach an entire body of work like a solo show versus a single piece when it comes to these kind of story developments? Does that change the way you build out a narrative if it's for a larger body of work?
Well, I'll pick a theme that I think the whole show will be about after I've done a bunch of sketches, and I'll go, this show, it seems to be about this, right? And then the paintings start to evolve and connect more with that idea that I have. I had a show, it was called Watch the Skies, and it was all about aliens or alien beings coming here. And the idea came from, I had a friend of mine when I was in art school, and he was just so out there. We thought, he's not from around here. I mean, maybe he's from out there, and that was the joke. And we would all point to the sky. Maybe he's from there, right? And he was just a stoner. He wasn't, that's all. So that idea stuck with me, and I thought, yeah, what about, like, what would aliens do if they came here, and why are they here, right? And then I thought of War of the Worlds, and I thought of the idea of people observing us. Why they'd want to observe us, I mean, I don't know, but
yeah, I know,
because we could be kind of crazy and kind of boring all at once.
Yeah, no doubt. So I guess as big as these stories are for you, have you ever considered like writing or having the written portion of the stories be a bigger component of what you do? Like actually just maybe publishing a book of short stories, something like that?
I will do that eventually. I do plan on doing that. I always have like a bigger story in my head. There's more. I've written a few stories like that where they're rather expanded from just a couple of paragraphs. So that is in the future, which is
nice.
That's something, and I just love telling stories, and it doesn't matter what format. I mean, who knows? Maybe motion pictures, maybe, who knows? You just never know where it's going to go.
Nice. Very cool. What kind of research do you do when you're concepting out these characters or just authoring their bios? Do you do any kind of formal research, or is it more just your own personal experience?
Well, if the character is from a very specific place, then I will go to the trouble of looking up that place and the history of that place, and then include details from the history of that location in the story, so it fits and it makes sense.
And so I guess once you've selected, it sounds like you do a lot of writing, and maybe some doesn't end up becoming a painting, which is a lot of case when people have sketchbooks and stuff like that. So once you have selected a story that you want to kind of move forward with and create a painting or a drawing out of, what's the next part of that process for you? Do you start just penciling out a composition or just dive right into your painting process?
Well, sketches first, and then I think, I need a reference for that. Then I would go and find what that person looks like. If it's an animal, let's say, like I had to do some fish guys. I was doing that for like a minute, and then there I was going to the library, I'd go online too, and then I'd go to the aquarium with my camera, and I was taking pictures of the fish in the aquarium. I love doing that. I go to the zoo and I take pictures of the animals there. Whatever. I go to the Museum of Natural History. And I look at things. I look at all the exhibits. Maybe it's just a shape that I like in somebody. You ever look at somebody and think, wow, that guy's kind of like, he's like a rectangle. Look at his head. It's like, so it happens. There's very, or some people are just like really pointy. And you're like, man, that lady is really pointy. Like that's like the first time I ever saw Celine Dion. The first thing I thought was, man, that lady's pointy. She's so pointy. Yeah,
I don't know that thought's come through my head, but that's interesting. So you take a lot of references, and then you at that point you start sketching out your pencil drawings, or
yeah, pretty much, and then I figure out what the painting is going to look like, and then I just do it.
Okay, how much do you usually have figured out in your drawings portion versus what ends up in the final painting?
I have most of it figured out. The only thing maybe not figured out is the lighting. I have to decide how I want to light it, and that's when I figure that out usually during the drawing, the full drawing stage, right before the painting.
Okay, and your main medium of choice for your paintings has always been acrylic. What do you like about acrylic in particular, opposed to like oil?
Well, the only reason why I use acrylics is because I did illustrations with acrylic, and it just dries really fast. Oil paint takes a little longer to dry. I mean, there's mediums you could add to it to make oil paint dry faster, but not at the speed of acrylic. Acrylic paint dries in 30 seconds.
Sure.
So, plus I have a blow dryer. You kind of really can't put a blow dryer on oil painting and expect it to like dry the way acrylic paintings dry.
For sure, but you do have a very interesting like blending style, which is tends to be a characteristic of oil. So I guess, how did you come upon this sort of glazing process that you use? Is that something that you developed yourself and kind of learned through happy accidents, or is it something you learned from somebody?
Well, it's really more of a watercolor technique. So it's like dry brush. I don't know how to explain that, but basically the paint on your brush is not really very wet. There isn't a lot of liquid there. So it dries pretty quickly, and I have a second brush in my other hand that sort of blends it very fast. And then I just layer it in little by little. And then it, after a while, if you do it the right way, you can get a very smooth transition.
Was it something you sort of just figured out on your own, or did you learn that from a teacher or another artist?
Well, I just sort of looked at other artists and just kind of figured it out, more or less. I mean, I would look at a lot of watercolor guys and think, well, why can't you do that with acrylic paint? And then you find out that you can do it, but there's things happen. If I was working in color, one of the things that would happen if you used like color and used acrylic that way is that you would lose your I guess you'd lose the chroma, the color, how bright the colors, how intense the intensity of the color. You would lose if you watered it down too much.
Okay, interesting. And another aspect of your style that's always really stood out to me is how soft many of the edges are, if that makes sense, which I think definitely adds to that vintage feel. Was that a conscious decision on your part to soften those edges, or is it just?
Oh yeah, I was trying to mimic those old 19th century photographs on purpose. So that's why everything is so soft. Actually, I kind of wish some things weren't so soft all the time. But it's just a product of the materials.
Is it that same like blending technique that you use to soften the edges that way?
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly the same.
Interesting. So, I know that along with your fine art practice, you've also been teaching art for quite a while at SVA, I guess, since 2010. which is amazing. And I think it's cool how you're able to give back to the community in that way and really kind of uplift the next generation of artists. How did you first get into teaching?
Well, I subbed for somebody. One of my friends, her name is Tara McPherson. She was teaching at Parsons, and she wanted me to sub her class. So I did just a couple times. I guess she had a show she had to go to, and so she had to leave just for those 2 weeks. So I came in and I subbed her class, and I kind of liked it. And then I was just up here working on my stuff, and the head of the department at SVA just happened to be around here, and he saw my work in a book that was on the shelf of the hardware store.
Oh, wow.
And he was just like, "Hey, maybe I should talk to that guy." 'Cause I guess he knew who I was, from the galleries, and that was the quickest way to find me. He just talked to the guy behind the desk at the behind the counter at the hardware store. He goes, "Oh yeah, that guy lives right over there." And
why was your book in the hardware store? Like, that was the other part of that question.
I'm friends with the guy behind the counter at the hardware store, and I gave it to him.
Oh, nice.
Because he's a good guy. His name is Wayne, and he's a really, really interesting character. He used to be a cop in New York City, so I always like hearing his stories. Again, the stories. I'm always listening to his stories.
Sure, yeah. So that ended up, I guess, getting interest in actually coming on board as a teacher.
Yeah. So then I started teaching drawing over there.
Okay, is that something you ever thought you'd get into, like when you were in school?
No, I didn't really think about it because it just looked hard. Teaching is hard. It's not easy. It's tricky because every student is at a completely different level, and how do you make it where it's one size fits all, right? It's not like you're teaching math. It's different. In math, the numbers, they don't change.
Right.
But with art, everything changes because you're dealing with each person's experience is different. Each person's skill level is different, right? And some people in the room are really, really good, and some people not so good. And it's not that they're not going to be good. It's just a question of time, right? And everyone develops at a different level. Some people are really gifted, and it doesn't seem to matter, but they still have to develop it, right?
Right.
It doesn't matter who you are and what you're gifted at. There's a window, right, to development for certain things. It changes from profession to profession. I would say, let's say, okay, here's an example. Let's say you're in high school, and for whatever reason, you can throw a ball at 98 miles an hour. And someone says, wow, we should train this guy. Maybe he could, so maybe he gets a scholarship, goes to college, and how he's on the baseball team at a college. So he could kind of do the stuff, but the pressure isn't quite like at the major league level, So, as soon as a scout shows up and then they sign him to a team, now it hits the big show, right? So now you're in like the minor leagues, and there's like levels, right? And you still, yes, you could throw the ball that hard, sure, but now you have to be able to do stuff with it. Can you throw it? Can you take a little off? Can you have late movement on that fastball? Can you do all those things? And also be consistent like that? And then under pressure do it, with, all this. And some people don't make it, no matter how talented they are. For whatever reason, they just, and any kind of art is like that, right? Musicians are like that, right? You've heard of stories of musicians that were really great musicians, but they got stage fright. They can't perform in front of people. Like, no matter how brilliant they are, they just can't do it, and that happens to artists too. There's really great artists that just can't work under pressure. They can't do illustration work for you because they can't handle the art direction. It happens.
No doubt. And so I guess, what you're getting at is, how do you balance that as a teacher where you have all these different people learning at different paces, and making it kind of universal?
Yeah. And the other thing, of course, is you have to think, okay, well, you don't want to hurt people psychologically, like there's, some teachers are really hard on the kids, and I try to tell them, I go, that's not how that works. Like in the real world, you'll work for somebody, and no art director is going to tell you stink. They're just not going to hire you again. That's the difference, right? I mean, this isn't like performance art where everybody sees it. This is just you, the art director, and whatever publication you're working for.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's not a matter of getting applause, it's a matter of getting the next job.
Get the job done, and then you can get the next job if they'll call you back, right? That's the plan. So I tell the kids, I don't yell at them because I'm like, well, would an art director yell at me? No, they don't yell at me. They just don't hire me again if they don't like what I did.
Right.
That's it. Right.
Has returning to academia, like on the other side of the podium, changed your perspective at all about the value of an art education?
Yes and no. One of the things that I've learned while teaching there is, and I wasn't cognizant of this when I was in school because you don't think of these things, but now that I'm sort of at it, that the job that you think you want when you're in school might change. That by the time you graduate, it might not be there anymore, right? And then something else might take its place. What am I saying? Okay, so when I was in art school, video games didn't exist. Not on the level that they exist now, right? So right now, a lot of students, they want to do concept work for video games, like these big video game companies like Blizzard, stuff that you find on like an Xbox or, it's a wonderful job if you can get it, but I don't know how long that's going to last. And, so when you graduate, will that job still be there? I don't know. We don't know, because maybe video games might change again, because technology is always constantly changing.
Sure.
Right? Think about it when you were a kid. These games didn't exist, right?
Another side of it is just expectation versus reality. Like you said, you thought you wanted to draw book covers, and then ended up drawing bank pamphlet covers. So it's like,
well, you have to take what's there, and then you also have to figure out that when you actually, is this what you really wanted? It's like, what if you can't? What if you don't like being art directed? What if you don't like people telling you what to do?
Well, and video games are extremely stressful with the deadlines and stuff that they have. So,
oh yeah, of course. There's always a deadline, no matter what kind of job you have in this business. There's always a deadline, and if you can't handle deadlines, that's another thing, right? I mean, when I first graduated, I used to think, oh, you had all this time to do an illustration. The art director calls you up, and you have 2 weeks. You don't have 2 weeks. You have 2 weeks to talk about it, and then after all the decisions are made, and then it's time for you to actually paint this thing, you might only have 3 days left. So now you have 3 days to paint this thing now. And then you learn how to paint fast, right? I mean, you think about a guy like Norman Rockwell when he was doing these are big oil paintings that he was doing for illustrations. He didn't have all that kind of time to actually paint the thing. He would spend a lot of time talking to the art director. And then after, maybe a week or two of that, then he would have to shoot all the models. So then he had to spend some time doing that. Then there was a drawing, and then the art director had to approve the drawing and maybe a color study. And then he would paint the thing. And it would take him, he would only have a few days left to actually do the full-on painting.
I read that he worked like crazy hours. Like that dude was intense.
Well, he had to work crazy hours because of all the interaction with whoever he worked for to get to that point where he was allowed to proceed, right?
Sure. Has teaching affected how or changed the way that you work on your own art at all? Has it sort of bled back into your craft?
Well, it keeps you on your toes because it reminds you of some things that you forget while you're doing it. Part of the speed of your painting comes from being aware of what happens while you're working. The methodology, the results, right? If you do something enough times, you kind of have a handle on where something is going to go. Like if you're a chef and there's a recipe and everything, it's this amount of oil, this amount of time to cook that thing under that temperature, right? Painting is like that. It's like, if I mix these colors and we know how long it'll take for this to dry, right? So, and this color mixed with that color makes this color. See, but if you do it enough times, it's in your head and you have an idea, right? When you're teaching, you become more cognizant of it because you're explaining that to the students, and you're like, "Oh, that's right, I forgot about that," because you're so used to doing it. So that's what it's done.
Like the act of articulation, I guess, I guess makes it more present in your mind.
Precisely, yeah. I mean, just think about like you're talking to a stand-up comic, right? And he's writing all this material. But, everyone is different, right? But if you do an interview with them, then they'll suddenly they're thinking about it. Like, wait a minute, is that what I do? Is that my process? Are they cognizant of their process, or are they just winging it? Because you don't know.
Right. How much are you able to keep up with the artists that you've taught over the years? Are you able to follow them as they may or may not launch their own careers?
Well, some of them have, and they've done okay, I guess. But mostly I haven't really been able to touch with them, but then they're still young in their career. A lot of times you don't really hit your stride until much later. You know, there's like I call it the 5 years. That's what I call it, the 5 years. If you hang in there for 5 years after you graduate, you will probably do this for the rest of your life. Some people just give up, you know, they just decide to do something else because it's just that hard. And maybe they realize it wasn't for them.
Sure. Being that you're in upstate New York, do you drive into the city to teach? Like, has that been that's an hour and a half, 2 hour drive?
It's 2 hours in the morning, and at night, because of rush hour, it's 3 hours to get back. And it's fine.
Has COVID affected the nature of how you teach? Like, are you doing more like everything remote now, or?
All the classes are online now. That's the way it is.
How do you like that? Like, teaching art remotely, like that sounds challenging. Just like the fact that you don't have a studio, you don't have all the materials right in front of you, you know?
Well, what the part that makes it difficult is that there is no hands-on. So I'm not right in front of the student saying, "Oh, hold it like this," because I can't see what they're doing unless they have cameras. And not all students have cameras. Not all students have all this technology at their disposal, so they could have two cameras going at the same time during a Zoom meeting, and one set to them working and the other one set to them talking. That's just the way it is, and that's the part that is not working as teaching online goes. But then in other ways, it's easier for me to critique their work and have all the other students see the critique at the same time. Because when you're in a classroom and they're all standing around, there's always somebody who has a bad seat. When you're online, there is not a bad seat in the house. So when I'm working on something and I've pulled their work up on the screen and I've shared the screen, everyone is seeing the exact same screen. So everything that I'm doing, they can see. So that in the one hand, that's good. On the other hand, not so good. So there's pluses and there's definitely some minuses. If you're teaching a drawing class and having a live model is not the same online as it is, in person, obviously. Right. So there's that.
Do you think the current class of students will be disadvantaged by this sort of thing in the long run?
I don't believe so. I think that they're still learning and they're just learning a different way of doing something. A lot of the students now are using iPads to do some of the work, and they're using a program called Procreate, and it's pretty amazing what they're able to do with that. That didn't exist 10 years ago. So just like that, right? Everything changes just like that.
Yeah, for sure. Technology, especially, it's moving at a lightning pace. One thing that I kept coming across as I was reading up on you are the various things that you've collected over the years, and I know that for a long time you were collecting antique, like fine writing instruments, timepieces, like old mechanical pencils, stuff like that. What got you into collecting those sort of older forms of your tools, effectively?
Well, it goes back to my grandfather. I inherited his machinist tools as well. But he worked for that watch company, so I've been always interested in old watches and old works. So when I come across them, I do buy them when I can. And fine writing instruments, I'm sort of a writing nerd, with fountain pens. So that's why I collect those things. I like the idea that you could still write with thicks and thins. I figured out a way to do it with just regular pens at this point.
Nice,
which is kind of funny.
Yeah, timely enough, your last Instagram post was you writing "Merry Christmas." You have an amazing hand. Like,
thanks.
Your writing is incredible.
And that's with like a crayon, is what that is. That's just a crayon. Someone said that I should write with a charcoal briquette, and I probably could, but I don't. That's a whole other thing.
Very cool. I guess it all kind of has created this, mid-century sort of. It's almost like a love of all this stuff that came before you that you've sort of surrounded yourself with, even in your collecting, which I find fascinating.
Well, there's a lot of people that whatever their profession is, that they're interested in what came before them, and they're fascinated by why things look a certain way, right? If like just like I was saying before, I listen to interviews with stand-up comics, and it's always interesting to hear how they describe the comics that came before them. And one guy even said that he thought somebody's act wouldn't work today because it wasn't fast enough. right? And he was talking about Mort Saul. I don't know if you know who that is, and even Lenny Bruce. Like their act wasn't fast. Like now it seems really quick. You got 5 minutes, and they're able to do so much in 5 minutes, and you're like, that's crazy, right? Right? You can in just 5 minutes, all the stuff that you could do. These guys that are storytellers, right? But I'm sure they're fascinated by it. Just like I guess like actors are probably fascinated by older actors and their methodology. And,
sure.
And people were different back then. Even filmmaking is different, right? Like if you took a movie edited today, the way we edit films today, and you showed that to somebody in 1925, it would blow their mind, right?
Right.
Can you imagine somebody in a movie theater, at the Ziegfeld, and they're watching the fucking Matrix? You put the Matrix on the screen for them, it would just blow their mind because they're not used to the quick cuts and the editing. It would be too much for them, So we adjust according to how visually things change over time. Music is like that too, right? If you think about what happens in the studio now, and what would that sound like to somebody in the 1940s if they were to hear something from today? It would sound really weird. It would be strange. The texture is different, right? What the songs are about is maybe the same, but told differently, sang differently, performed differently, and they're not used to it. And art is like that,
Yeah, well, and at the same time, I mean, these older comedians, these older musicians, all of that informed today. I mean,
exactly.
It's all built into what became today's present, Well,
I think of it as a continuing conversation, right? So everything just sort of builds, and I don't know if it necessarily degrades, but definitely builds. And there's sort of there's a difference in terms of the way information is spread now, right? So like I would say this country is losing or has lost a lot of its regionalism, right? Like it used to be you could go to a different state and the stores would all be different, right? But now I can go to any mall, anywhere, and I could find an Old Navy, and I could find I might even be able to find a Hot Topic somewhere. I don't know if that place is still in business, but you could find these places, right? And they're in any mall in any state of the country, right? But it wasn't like that before. Even music was different, right? You'd have entire markets that were different, like Cleveland, or famously New York versus Los Angeles. Because even the rap music was different in New York than it was in LA, right? There was actually a difference in like 1981. Like when someone talks to you about punk rock, right? And they say punk rock, and what do you think of immediately? You think of three places. You think of London, you think of New York, and you think of California. And it's like three different things happening at the same time. And then you have these other states in the middle. But it's like a different sound, a different thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can't look at like the Sex Pistols and the band X and the Red Hot Chili Peppers and think they're all the same. They're not. That's three totally different sounds,
No, it's fascinating how the regionalism, like you said, you still see that a little bit, I guess, with like grocery stores and stuff. The grocery stores in Austin are going to be completely different from what's in LA versus New York, so you still get a little bit of that, but to a large degree, like you said, that's sort of been drowned away.
Yeah, because it's about accessibility, right? So you have, especially with art, you could go to a gallery in Los Angeles and there's people buying art at that gallery, but they're buying it online, and the buyer might even be in New York, Or I have people that buy my work in New York that live in San Francisco. You know what I mean? So it's right. So because of the internet, because people can see it, It doesn't matter, and that's great.
So before we talk about what you have coming up, let's talk about your last solo show, which was at KP Projects, opened on Halloween of all days, which was cool, and entitled Curious Beasts. Did this body of work like have its own narrative of above and beyond what the overarching themes that we were talking about before, or was it more or less an extension of some of those ideas?
It was kind of an extension of the previous show, which was over at William Basic Fine Arts Gallery in Massachusetts. And I was thinking about people who had just really unusual sort of pets. And that comes from just, my own house, where I have what some people would consider to be unusual kind of pets to have. I have... my wife has these dart frogs that those beautiful blue dart frogs, and we have these African clawed frogs, excuse me. And then I have a Pac-Man frog, they call it. So we have a lot of amphibians in our house, an axolotl, And then I have a collection of tarantulas, like different kinds of tarantulas. So this idea that you have these really weird kind of pets, and I thought, oh well, I just imagine other people having these odd sort of interactions with different animals.
Very cool. I mean, what got you into collecting dart frogs and all these like frogs?
I've always been fascinated with reptiles and amphibians, and then I thought I went to a reptile expo, and my wife was like, "Oh man, look at that!" And it was an axolotl. I don't know if you've ever seen what an axolotl looks like.
Yeah, yeah.
And we'd never had one as a pet before, and we were always fascinated with it. And then just on a whim, we decided we'll do some research, and then we went back to the next reptile expo after that. Months and months later, and then we purchased one. I always say to people, if you're going to buy an animal, whether it's a cat, a dog, or whatever, you should do your research. Don't just on a whim. You have to see, is this something that I can have? Because you always hear about people getting like a dog or a cat, and they live in an apartment in the city, and then they find out maybe it wasn't the best idea, right?
Yeah.
That's really not great. Dogs don't like to be left inside all the time.
Yeah.
That's not a thing, They want to be outside.
So was that a good choice to pick that one up, or did you have that discovery that maybe you shouldn't have?
No, it's great. It's
Okay.
it's actually pretty easy to take care of because you don't have to walk it. It's in a tank, So you have to feed it, sure, but as long as you maintain the levels, the chemical levels of the water, and clean the tank out consistently, you'll be able to take care of the animal without troubles.
So all of the works for Curious Beasts, did you create all of that during quarantine, or did you have that started prior to lockdowns and stuff?
No, that was all created during quarantine. Everything.
Did that affect the nature of the show at all, or like how you worked on it?
It did. It slowed me down. I couldn't do as many paintings. Normally I do, for her, I would give her like 15 to 16 paintings. And this time I can only give her so many, because there was just so much going on. With the COVID thing, I couldn't leave my house. I had to stay here. And, it kind of stilted my productivity. And you would think I'm an artist, I work inside, like it wouldn't be a problem. But no, I need to get out. I need to get outside. And I didn't see a lot of people, because that's part of the experience, is going out and looking at people and things, I didn't do that as much, and it really affected the work.
Yeah, well, and also, I mean, just the mental space everybody's in. I can absolutely see how that could affect people's ability to create and just their motivation in general, What was it like opening a show in the midst of all of this? Like, I don't guess you were able to make it out to LA for the opening.
No, there were some heavy restrictions on traveling, and or rather, I put heavy restrictions on traveling because I think that it's safer if you don't get on a plane and go somewhere, because you don't know all who you don't know all, you don't have a history of everybody at the airport. You have no idea who has it, who doesn't have it. You don't know, so why take the risk? This is not something to be messed around with. Right.
Yeah.
So I didn't
doubt.
fly out. And the opening, there weren't a whole lot of people there. Normally I have an opening in Los Angeles, and under normal conditions, it's kind of a fun party almost. All these people show up, all my friends in LA, and it's fun, And that's any opening, really. It's nice that it's a night out, but not this time.
Yeah, no, I mean it's good that you're taking it seriously, because there's segments of the population that aren't, so it's good that you're cognizant of that. I guess, what do you think about this large move to virtual openings in general? Like, how do you think that will affect the market, the art market, and the art community going forward?
Well, it changes the hyperbole used to describe these things, because you don't get to see the art in person, right? I think part of what's lost is the experience of looking at art in person. I mean, there's nothing quite like going to a museum or an event, an opening, and seeing the paintings right in front of you, or a sculpture, walking around a sculpture at an event. You kind of can't do that online. I mean, you sort of can, but not really. You're not getting the full visual effect of the thing, and that's a shame. I think that's lacking. I think that's something we want to try and educate people about artwork. That it's important to see the real thing. If you can, if it's possible. Yeah.
No, for sure. So let's talk about what you have coming up. What does 2021 look like for you? Any shows that you're working on?
Yeah, I have a show at the Haven Gallery coming up in the middle of the year. So we're talking like I guess May. So
okay.
And then in between that, I'm just kind of working on stuff. And then toward the end, I probably have a show in Seattle at the end of the year at Rock LaRue.
Okay. The show at Haven in May, is that a solo show or is it a larger group show?
No, it's a solo show. So there'll be a decent number of paintings there. And so I'm pretty excited about that.
Have you already started working on it?
Yes, I started working on it. It's more aquatic sort of thing. So there's a lot of fish. I'm doing a lot of fish stuff. I haven't told her that, but I guess she'll find out now. He listens to the podcast and goes, "Wait, he's painting fish for my gallery? What?" Well, it won't just be the fish; it'll be the fishermen too. So there is that. And who doesn't like to see that kind of a story?
For sure. How many pieces do you think you'll have?
15. I think that's going to be the magic number. I like the idea of somebody telling, in quotes, a fish story, right? I could have caught it. It was this big, but it just the line broke. There's always that. Yeah, you ever go fishing? Are you a fisherman? You ever do that kind of thing out there?
My father is a fisherman, so he took me along when I was a kid quite a bit, but not anything that I really get up to at all.
Well, one of the things that happens when you're on a boat and you're fishing, and it's like there's a lot of fishermen on that boat, is that the lines get caught between like someone else's line. Like you think you got something, but it's really the guy on the other side of the boat. You caught his line, and you just like you pull really hard, and then someone goes, "Whoa, this thing's got some fight in it," and it's really just you making it hard for that guy on the other side of the boat. He has no idea, And if you're stronger than him, he'll get a surprise. But what ends up happening is you guys cut everyone has wire cutters and they're always cutting the lines. So, and then hence the one that got away. So I think that's very funny.
No, that's great. That sounds like a great theme for the show for sure. What about the show in Seattle? That's towards the end of the year, you said?
Yeah, that's going to be like toward well into fall, So we're talking like October again. And that's probably going to be a little more Halloween themed, probably. I haven't really fully thought that out yet. I'll know more in August what that's going to be. Yeah.
Very cool. Any print releases coming up that you'd want to put on people's radar?
At the moment, I'm just finishing up the print sales from Christmas or whatever. I still have those up right now, but I'm going to be releasing some more prints probably in a few months, and so people just keep your eyes out.
Very cool. So where can people find you online so they can keep up with all this stuff?
Just travislouie.com, or you could follow me on Instagram. That's social media is such a kooky thing, isn't it?
It is.
I try to use all of it, so I'm on Twitter and I'm on Facebook and and Instagram and whatever it takes to just get people to see what it is that I'm working on. That's the plan.
No, it's great. Okay, last question, and this is something that I like to ask everybody. Who is one artist that you'd like to see me have on the show?
An artist I'd like to see you have on the show? That's a good question. Let's see. Probably Audrey Kawasaki, if you haven't had her before.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Have you talked to her before?
No, I haven't yet, no.
Because I'd be curious where she's at and what's going on with her work. Her and I think who else? Have you had Tara McPherson on there before?
No, I haven't. But no, I think those are both fantastic suggestions.
And I'm trying to think who else off the top of my head. And then any kind of, I guess, maybe a production designer of some kind. Maybe somebody like my friend Carlos Huente, because his work is kind of marvelous, and you've all seen it. If you've seen the movie It, he designed that thing. Those are his drawings.
Oh, wow, really?
That made the clown. Isn't that funny though? There'll be these wonderful things that we see all the time, and we have no idea who designed them. Like if you think about, I don't know, like a Jaguar, like that beautiful sort of E-type 1960s Jaguar. It was designed by a guy named Malcolm Sayer, but nobody knows that he did it. Everyone just sees Jaguar, right? You know what I mean? Or Larry Shinoda, the guy designed cars for GM. And again, this you look at these things and you see that Stingray Corvette all the time, but you have no idea that there's this guy that put that together, designed the shape of it, right?
Well, and I think a lot of it is, nowadays, a lot of the designs are by committee, and a lot of these larger companies have groups of people that are designing them, so it's not just one person's vision like it used to be.
Yeah. Well, there is that. But I think it's funny that it comes down to marketing and hyperbole. If you could tell somebody something is awesome enough times, people start to think it's awesome, even though it might not be so awesome. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's just a curiosity. You hear it and you kind of go, "Well, that's something." But is it something that's valuable? Who knows, right? I guess it's an eye of the beholder kind of thing. But sometimes you tell somebody enough times, it becomes like an earworm. And I could think of a number of songs that we've heard over the years where, in hindsight, you're like, "Well, that is a terrible song. Why was it on the radio so often?" Right? You're like, "Wait," or "Oh, wait, that guy wasn't funny. Everyone thought he was funny. Why did they think he was funny?" But at the time, it just worked out.
Yeah, for sure. Well, those are great suggestions, Travis, and thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me today. I really appreciate it.
Cool, man. Thanks for having me.
All right, sweet. So we'll cut there. What did you think?
That's great.
So that's it for this episode of Art Affairs. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Travis. I really loved what Travis had to say about why he, intentionally uses these otherworldly creatures and human oddities to tell stories about racism and the immigrant experience in America. It's effectively an abstraction, which will hopefully make these messages more universal and relatable to everybody. That really makes a lot of sense to me, and I hadn't really thought about it in those terms. I do think that the charming nature of his stories and the bits of humor that he tends to, weave into them has this sort of disarming effect as well. It brings people in, engages with them in a comfortable and relatable way, but also carries with it a message about these larger and more heavy but very important themes. I'm excited to see how his upcoming show at Haven comes together. I love the story that he seems to be building around it, involving tall fishing tales, stories about the one that got away, The exhibition looks to be opening in May, so be sure to follow Travis and Haven's Instagram for more details about the show as they're announced. So thanks again to Travis for joining me today, and thank you for checking out the show. I'm truly grateful for your support. One big way you could help out if you're enjoying the show would be to review it on Apple Podcasts. And of course, just sharing it with your friends. As always, you can contact me through my website at artaffairespodcast.com or on Instagram at artaffairespodcast. So until next time, be good to yourself and be good to each other.